Hey guys, tonight we travel somewhere hot. Not just beach day hot or ugh, my seatbelt burned me hot. No. Imagine yourself dropped in the middle of an endless Persian desert around 2,500 years ago. The sun hangs like a molten coin in the sky, and your sandals feel like they're melting with every step. You can taste the dryness. Your skin, it's roasting. And there's no fridge, no AC, no chilled water bottles. You might survive the day, sure, but sleeping tonight? Not likely. Unless, of course, you're Persian, because somehow these ancient desert dwellers figured out how to cool their homes, their palaces, even their ice. Yes, ice. In the desert. And you probably wouldn't survive this climate long enough to figure it out on your own. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I read every single comment curled up with my own late night tea. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the edge of an ancient Persian city. The sand stretches out in every direction like an ocean made of ash. But there, on the horizon, something gleams. Marble, maybe. You trudge closer, feet dragging, throat dry. And as you pass through the arched gate of this civilization, the heat shifts, not cooler yet, but less aggressive. Almost like the air here is being told to behave. You step onto cobbled streets. The buildings are tall, shadowing the paths between them. Every corner, every window seems placed with purpose, like they've done this before, like they've had centuries of practice fighting the sun. And they have. You wipe sweat from your brow as a dusty breeze stirs your robe. Then you notice something odd. People here aren't sweating, not like you, not desperately. Their homes? Mud brick, some of them, sure, but intricately designed, with towers sticking up like chimneys. Kids play in the alleys. An old woman fans herself lazily. You, meanwhile, feel like a baked potato wrapped in disappointment. This was Persia, the heart of the Achaemenid Empire, the seat of Darius the Great. And while he conquered half the known world, his engineers quietly declared war on the sun. Spoiler, they kind of won. The empire sprawled from modern-day Iran to parts of India, Turkey, and Egypt. But its core, the Iranian plateau, was brutal. Summers regularly hovered above 100 degrees C, around 38 degrees C, in the shade. In the shade, which is why they became masters of manipulating air, moisture, and material to create artificial cool in a time when most people were just praying to not spontaneously combust. You pass through a marketplace where stalls are shaded by heavy woven cloth and shopkeepers sit in surprising comfort. Jugs of water rest in clay pots that seem to sweat. You spot sliced fruit in bowls of crushed ice. Crushed ice. And your overheated brain momentarily suspects time travel. That's when a merchant notices your disbelief and gestures toward a tall structure jutting out from the nearest roof. It looks like a brick periscope with slits on each side. You squint. What is that? He chuckles. Bad gear, he says, pointing. Wind catcher. These towers are the first line of defense against the sun's tyranny, designed to catch the slightest breeze, even in a still desert night, and funnel it downward into homes, cooling the interior naturally. No wires, no fans, just stone, shape, and ancient know-how. And this isn't new tech. Archaeological evidence shows Persians have been doing this since around 2000 BCE. That's older than Rome, older than Plato, older than your least favorite cousin's conspiracy theories. It's all about knowing the enemy. See, the sun's predictable. It rises in the east, sets in the west, and cooks everything in between. So Persian architects learned how to use this predictability like a lever. They built thick walls from sun-baked mud brick, great at insulating against both heat and cold. They oriented buildings to face prevailing winds, They created long, narrow corridors with shaded courtyards that pulled hot air up and out while inviting cooler air in. Imagine living in a house that gently breathes all day, exhaling warm air, inhaling cool. That's what Persian architecture felt like. Passive cooling, they call it now. Back then, just survival with style. But here's a fringe tidbit for you. Some historians believe the earliest concepts for these cooling systems came not from architecture at all, but from observing animal burrows. Desert animals dig deep, shaded tunnels that maintain steady, cool temperatures. And humans, in their infinite genius and occasional laziness, might have said, yeah, let's do that, but with a roof and some rugs. Not everyone agrees, though. Historians still argue whether Persia truly invented passive air cooling, or whether similar ideas popped up independently in Egypt or Mesopotamia. But when it comes to perfecting it, Persia definitely wins the most likely to chill award. You keep walking. The path leads you toward the outskirts of the city. There, on a slight hill, you see a royal estate, towering walls, courtyards, palm trees dancing in slow wind. The kind of place where you assume there's a hidden fridge full of popsicles. You step inside, and immediately, it's like walking into a cave. Not dark, but cool, calm. There's a faint scent of mint in the air, and from above, you hear the faintest whistle of wind moving through the bagyir, descending softly into the hall. Even the air feels ancient. The bricks beneath your feet radiate an odd coolness, like they've remembered the night before and are whispering it back into the day. You glance up at intricate vents carved just below the roofline, angled precisely to pull hot air out like a reverse chimney. You stand still. No fans, no machines, just stone, earth, and the occasional bird fluttering past. And somehow, you're no longer sweating. You wander deeper into the estate, where narrow hallways snake like quiet rivers between open courtyards and thick-walled chambers. The temperature drops again, not dramatically, but just enough to make you exhale a little longer, like your lungs are finally done protesting. And there it is again, that quiet hum. Not from any machine, of course. It's air itself, gently tugged through the building by something overhead. You step outside into a small courtyard and look up. Another tower, another badger. This one is even taller. It rises like a watchtower, but instead of guarding against soldiers, it guards against suffocating heat. Long vertical slits open to the breeze, facing whichever direction the wind chooses to whisper from that day. The inside, hollow, with internal veins or channels angled to direct airflow downward. Here's the thing, this tower doesn't care if the air is hot, it just needs movement. As wind enters the slit, it's funneled down the shaft and into the rooms below. If the wind is still, convection kicks in. Warm air from the house rises up through the bagyir, escaping into the sky and creating suction that pulls cooler air in from courtyards and shaded corridors. It's a delicate dance between temperature, movement, and design, and it works almost too well for something invented over 2,000 years ago. You pass a family lounging beneath one of the towers. They're sipping something that smells like rose water. A sleepy cat stretches in a patch of dappled shade. No fans, no sweat, just peace. Here's a mainstream fact to file away. The oldest known badgers still standing today are in the city of Yazd, Iran. Some date back over 700 years, and many are still functional. That's like finding a 14th century toaster that still makes perfect golden toast every morning. You circle around the tower and spot a staircase winding up to the roof. With the kind of hesitation usually reserved for uncertain elevators and suspicious leftovers, you climb. The rooftop is flat, wide, and surrounded by low walls. From up here, you get a panoramic view of more towers, dozens of them, dotting the skyline like chimneys from a forgotten fairy tale. They don't smoke, they don't buzz, and they don't break down during sandstorms. They just stand there, listening to the wind. A gust blows past your face, and you turn instinctively. There, facing the wind, The slits of the badgear catch. The current like sails. The air gets drawn in and disappears down into the shaft. It's so simple, so smart. And now your face isn't just warm, it's curious. A fringe theory you'll enjoy. Some believe that certain badgers weren't just for cooling. They were acoustic amplifiers. In the right conditions, with air moving just so, they could carry conversations from one part of a home to another like primitive intercoms. Imagine telling your cousin dinner's ready by whispering into a wind tunnel. Now that's family drama with airflow, but back to the roof. Something else stands out here. Water jugs placed near the tower's base. Not by accident. When air moves across water, it picks up moisture. Moist air feels cooler, even if it's not actually colder. This was ancient Persia's way of adding a humidifier setting to their passive air conditioning system, all done with jars, shade, and clever placement. You crouch near one of the openings, peering into the shaft. It's dark. The sides are smooth. Somewhere below, you hear the echo of life. Maybe a soft clatter of plates, or the jingle of ankle bells from a passing servant. And the breeze that brushes your cheek carries a faint scent of herbs. Basil, maybe, something green and pleasant. Here's where it gets fascinating. The shape of the badger mattered as much as its direction. Some were square, others octagonal or cylindrical. Each shape changed how air moved through the system. Square ones were easier to build but made harsher sounds in high wind. Cylindrical ones were quieter but harder to construct. Historians still argue which design offered the best balance of cost, cooling, and acoustic charm. Like ancient desert debates over whether curved walls made rooms feel cozier or just weird. You imagine being an architect back then. No computers, no fans, just the sun, the wind, and trial and error with mud and bricks. You had to understand. Airflow like a poet understands rhythm. Every window was a verse, every courtyard a pause, every tower a line break. One wrong angle, and your house became a sauna. One right channel, and your guests stayed long enough to write poetry about your comfortable sitting room. Which, yes, people did. Back downstairs, you find yourself in a narrower corridor. The temperature is noticeably cooler again. The walls here are thicker, and the breeze that tickled your nose on the rooftop now swirls softly around your ankles. The floor tiles are worn smooth from centuries of sandaled feet and indoor breezes. You reach out and touch the wall. It's made of sun-baked bricks and coated in plaster. Cool to the touch, not ice cold, just the sort of cool that makes your skin lean in instead of flinch. That's the charm of this design. It doesn't try to overpower nature. It works with it. You hear a soft voice behind a curtain. Someone singing a lullaby. Maybe to a child. Maybe to themselves. The sound carries through the space with strange clarity. Proof, perhaps, that the acoustic fringe theory isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. You sit in a corner for a moment and close your eyes. Just for a moment. The breeze, the walls, the quiet, all of it conspires to make your body believe, even in this ancient desert heat, that sleep is near. The path leads you out of the estate and toward the base of a distant ridge, just beyond the edge of the city, where sunburnt rocks rise like waves frozen mid-crash. You're drawn by something almost mythic, something whispered in yesterdays. Market chatter, a hidden river, not above ground, but beneath your feet. You reach a small opening carved into the earth. It looks humble, just a hole really, but what lies below is one of the most brilliant engineering marvels of the ancient world. A qanat. You crouch at the entrance and feel it. A whisper of air, cool and damp, brushing against your face like a sigh. You take a cautious step down, ducking slightly, and begin descending into the dark. The light fades. The air grows heavier, but not in the way of dust or fear. It's cleaner somehow, smoother. The walls are rough stone, hand-cut centuries ago, and the passage spirals downward gently but firmly. Your sandals scrape against the slope. The deeper you go, the cooler it gets. Now you hear it. Water. A soft, constant trickle. echoing off, the walls like a lullaby for the earth itself. You reach the bottom and step onto a narrow ledge beside a flowing channel, barely wide enough to walk. This is the Qanat, an underground aqueduct, carved with maddening precision by ancient workers. Some Qanats ran for miles, sloping ever so slightly downhill to bring water from mountain aquifers to distant cities without a single pump. Mainstream fact: the Persians developed Qanats around 1000 BCE, and the system was so effective that it's still in use today in parts of Iran, Afghanistan, and North Africa. Cities lived and died based on the health of their Qanats. You mess with the Qanat, you mess with life. You place your hand just above the water's surface. It's icy, not cool, icy. You weren't ready for that. See, the magic here isn't just in carrying water, it's in carrying cold. Underground, away from the sun's tantrums, the water remains chilled even on the hottest days. And as it flows beneath, homes, palaces, and gardens, it brings with it a breeze of natural refrigeration. A niche detail. Some elite Persian homes had vents or stone shafts that ran from the Qanat directly into the floors of living quarters. These acted like underground air conditioners, channeling cool, moist air upward into rooms while pushing hot air out through wind catchers. A two-way system. No cords, just gravity and genius. You keep walking alongside the water. Occasionally, thin vertical shafts pierce upward toward the sky like portholes for moles. These aren't just vents, they're how the Qanat breathes, how it lives. But construction wasn't a walk in the palm grove. These tunnels were dug by hand, with teams of labourers descending down vertical shafts, then carving out horizontal channels in absolute darkness. Some shafts dropped over 100 feet. It was dangerous, back-breaking, claustrophobic. You probably would have quit before lunchtime. Still, the result was worth it. Cities thrived in otherwise uninhabitable deserts. Gardens bloomed where only rocks should have grown. Even Alexander the Great reportedly admired the system during his Persian campaigns. And say what you want about Alexander, he had taste in architecture and shoulder armor. As you walk, you notice the channel splitting. One fork continues downward, while another subtly veers toward what looks like a sealed stone grate. You follow it. Above, daylight breaks through another access shaft. It casts just enough glow for you to make out the walls here, lined with smooth stones and clay, but also decorated with faint carvings. Not decorative ones. Instructions, maintenance, schedules, symbols denoting water flow, angles, and distances. This was a highway, a plumbing system, and a science lab rolled into one damp tunnel. Fringe theory time. Some researchers argue that Qanats weren't just functional, they were spiritual. They believe ancient Zoroastrians saw underground water as sacred, symbolizing life and purity. Walking through this passage, with its hushed sounds and cool breath, you kind of believe it. Historians, of course, still argue about the spiritual angle. Some say it's just wishful thinking, romanticizing plumbing. Others say you can't separate daily survival from spiritual reverence when your environment is this extreme. Maybe both are right. Maybe it's all the same in the end. You climb back toward daylight, the air warming as you ascend. At the top, you emerge into a shaded garden, lush, green, almost aggressively vibrant against the background of beige and gold. A stone channel runs through the garden, fed by the Qanat. Beside it, palms sway and citrus trees lean toward the sound of flowing water like lazy eavesdroppers. The air here is noticeably cooler. Why? Because flowing water cools not just itself, but its surroundings. The placement of this garden wasn't decorative, it was strategic. Air moving over the cool water picks up moisture, which then flows into the home through open doors and window vents. Persian engineers weren't just cooling homes, they were designing microclimates. A soft breeze rolls through the garden, and the scent of oranges hangs heavy in the air. You sit by the water and dip your feet in. Finally, some relief. The stream gurgles beside you, calm and confident. You think about the people who built this. Craftsmen who had no GPS, no drones, no laser levels, just rope, sight lines, and stubborn perfectionism. And maybe a grumpy foreman yelling about slope, gradients. And still, somehow, it worked. It endured. It cooled cities. It saved lives. A few paces away, a narrow stone bench rests in the shade of a pomegranate tree. You lie back, eyes half closed, listening to the water, feeling the breeze, knowing that beneath you, somewhere in the darkness, the qanat still hums. Your back rests against the cool stone bench. The air is thick with the scent of pomegranate blossoms, and the trickle of water nearby hums like a sleepy lullaby. But your journey's far from over, because as you rise and follow the garden's path toward another cluster of homes, you notice something curious. Ceramic jars dripping wet sitting in windows. Not decorative, functional. These aren't flower pots or ancient cookie jars. These are part of one of the cleverest techniques ancient Persians ever used to beat the heat. Evaporative cooling. The idea is so simple, it almost feels like cheating. Take a porous container, usually unglazed clay or earthenware. Fill it with water. As the water seeps through the surface and meets dry desert air, it evaporates. That evaporation, it pulls heat away with it. The result? Cool air, cooler water, a miracle hiding in a mud pot. You lean close to one and feel it. Cold. The outside of the jar is chilled, even though it's sitting in the open window under a sun that's clearly angry about something. You press a finger to it. Yep, cold enough to raise eyebrows. Yours specifically. Inside the home, the jars are placed strategically, next to air vents, beneath bajers, beside doorways. As wind flows past them, it picks up the cooled vapor and carries it inside like a tired delivery guy with a chilled breeze in his bag. This wasn't some peasant trick either. Palaces and public baths used this technique too. In fact, many Persian homes had woven mats soaked in water hung across doorways or windows. As air passed through the mat, it cooled down dramatically. It's the same principle behind modern swamp coolers. But this version doesn't need a plug or a "help me, I'm beeping" maintenance light. You crouch near one of the vents in a family's courtyard. The floor above it is warm from the sun, but the air moving through the vent, crisp, light. It smells faintly of wet earth, like a memory of a distant rainstorm. You pause there longer than you need to, just enjoying the contrast. Here's a mainstream fact to chew on while you rest. Ancient Egyptians, Greeks, and Indians all used evaporative cooling, but Persians made it a science. They optimized jar thickness, placement, water purity, even jar shape. Some were wide at the bottom, narrow at the top. Others had ribs to increase surface area. Every detail was an opportunity to outwit the sun. You reach for a smaller pot perched on a windowsill. It's a zir, designed to keep drinking water, cool without refrigeration. You uncork it just a little and sip. The water is chilled, like it's been sitting in a cave. And all it took was clay, time, and science masquerading as tradition. Now for a fun fringe tidbit. In some regions, these jars weren't just practical. They were decorative status symbols. Families painted them, sculpted ornate necks, or inscribed them with prayers for coolness, health, or long life. Cooling your water with flair, that's an energy flex. But as with most historical brilliance, not everyone agrees who did it first. Historians still argue whether Persians truly pioneered the evaporative jar method, or simply perfected it. Some point to earlier designs in Mesopotamia. Others argue similar techniques developed independently in North Africa and the Indus Valley. All plausible. But one thing's for sure, Persians used it best, and they used it everywhere. You pass a communal bathhouse, low stone walls, deep steps, and an arched roof that glows golden in the sun. Peeking inside, you find a small antechamber lined with, what else? Wet mats and ceramic jars. Even here, before you enter the warm bath, they're using air and water to cool the waiting space. Smart. Yes. Necessary. Definitely. Comfortable. Surprisingly, The bathhouse attendant nods as you pass. Hot water comes easy, he says, gesturing toward the stone furnace. But cooling, that takes art. Outside again, you follow the path into a residential neighborhood. Mud brick homes line the narrow walkways, casting long shadows that feel almost intentional. And guess what? They are. Streets were designed in zigzagging patterns, not just to confuse future tourists, but to minimize wind erosion and maximize shade at all hours of the day. Air flows better through narrow corridors. Less sunlight reaches the ground. Less heat radiates back up. It's like the whole neighborhood was designed by a very, very tired person who just wanted a nap. You catch a child running past with a piece of damp cloth held high like a flag. She vanishes into an alleyway where other kids are playing beneath the overhang of a rooftop water drain. There's laughter, a splash, and the unmistakable shriek of someone who just got soaked. Turns out, in some homes, drains from rooftop water storage doubled as surprise sprinkler systems. Not on purpose. But hey, cool water is cool water. A little boy hands you a piece of melon. You take it, bite into it, and blink. It's cold. Cold. He grins, pointing behind him to a shaded well with a clay jug hanging just above the waterline. They lowered fruits and drinks into wells to chill them before serving. Primitive fridge. Delightful snack. These weren't just tricks. They were tools, passed down through generations like family recipes. You cool your house one way, your neighbor uses another. The city as a whole cools together, and the best part, these methods were sustainable, silent, stylish. You could have the architecture of a palace and the climate control of a cave, all without making a single noise. As you turn the corner, a vendor fans herself behind a small cart filled with cooled rosewater jars. She winks. The air here, she says, it listens to us. You smile, and for a second, you believe it. The sun still blazes above you, yet somehow, you've forgotten to feel oppressed by it. You're strolling through the heart of a city that seems to breathe coolness, like an ancient meditation trick passed down through bricks. Ahead looms a sprawling palace, more ornate than anything you've seen so far. Its entrance, a grand arch flanked by stone columns, each one etched with delicate floral patterns, the kind that only exist when artisans have enough shade to concentrate. You step inside, and the first thing you notice, other than the immediate drop in temperature, is silence. Not absence of sound silence, but that soft, luxurious hush that only happens in perfectly designed spaces. The walls stretch high, the ceilings vault like the inside of a shell, and at the far end of the room stands another badir. This one, wider and segmented, like a massive stone organ pipe. This, you realize, is not just a royal residence, it's an air symphony. Persian palaces didn't just accommodate airflow, they composed with it. The floors are covered in intricate tile mosaics. They sparkle with greens, blues, and whites, colors chosen not just for beauty, but to reflect heat and cool the gaze. As you walk across them, each footstep feels like you're tapping into history's longest-running HVAC system. Above you, wide wooden beams cross the ceiling, spaced in such a way that rising warm air funnels upward in soft spirals. Slits in the roof allow just enough light, but also act as vents. The entire building works like a lung. It inhales cool from shaded courtyards. It exhales heat up and out through badirs and clear stories. There are no fans, no buzzing, just architecture breathing like a living organism. And that breeze? The one threading through the corridors like a whisper. It's been engineered through room placement, ceiling height, water channels, and material density to follow you around like a very polite ghost. You wander deeper and arrive in a central chamber with 4 arched doorways leading in from different directions. In the center, a marble fountain trickles quietly. It doesn't spray or shoot. It murmurs. And even the way the sound bounces off the curved walls makes you feel like the room is speaking in slow, relaxed syllables. Here's your mainstream history. Fix. Many of these royal palaces, like those in Persepolis and Pasargadae, were designed not just for show, but to manage extreme climate. Persian kings might have been ambitious conquerors, but they were also surprisingly into passive cooling. Darius III, big on airflow. Xerxes, rumoured to have demanded courtyards wide enough to catch a soft wind from every side. And yes, we wish that quote was more widely known. A fringe theory for your sleepy brain. Some archaeologists suggest that these palaces weren't just homes or government offices, but demonstration spaces designed to show off Persian environmental mastery to foreign diplomats. Imagine walking into a cool palace from the scorching plains of Mesopotamia and thinking, you know what? These people are gods. But of course, historians still argue the true purpose behind many of these features. Some say the layouts were symbolic matching constellations. Others believe it was all just trial and error with occasional lucky drafts. The truth? Probably a mix of planning, adaptation, and good old-fashioned empire-building ego. You pause at the edge of the courtyard. The columns here are impossibly tall, painted with natural pigments that glow like faded starlight. Between them, thin channels run across the floor, guiding water through the space like invisible ribbons. These aren't just for show, they cool the floors and air as they move. You lean over and watch the water flow. It isn't rushing, it's gliding, slow and sure, creating tiny pockets of cooled air around it. The breeze hits the surface and picks up moisture. That moistened air then floats through the hallways and lingers just long enough to trick your skin into thinking you're not in the desert. Someone walks by you, robes flowing, a scroll tucked under one arm. He vanishes into one of the side rooms, but not before you catch sight of the faintest shimmer behind him. Ice. You follow, of course. Through a narrow archway and down a flight of cool stone steps, you arrive at a small chamber. And there, tucked into a corner, you see it. A shallow pool of water, ringed by stone, kept cold by airflow and insulation. The room is dark, save for a small shaft of light piercing down from a vent above. Air moves in a soft circle, pulled in from the badgear above, gliding across the water, then pulled out again through an exhaust passage. The walls are thick, lined with clay and brick, sometimes even stuffed with straw or ash, early versions of thermal insulation. The design ensures that the day's heat never makes it this far down. Here, temperatures can drop by 15-20 degrees Fahrenheit, and sometimes, yes, depending on the season and humidity, ice forms overnight. In a desert, you sit on a ledge, hand hovering over the pool. It's cold enough to make your fingers twitch. And for a long moment, all you hear is the gentle hiss of air sliding across water, cooling stone and calming skin. Back upstairs, as you return to the palace courtyard, you finally understand. These spaces weren't just designed to be cool. They were designed to feel cool, emotionally, psychologically, like a lullaby made of limestone and geometry. And you, yes you, are starting to feel it. The way the wind brushes your cheek just right. The rhythm of water and wall. The architecture leaning in and saying, hey, relax. The palace fades behind you, but its breeze still lingers on your skin like a memory you're not quite ready to shake. Your path winds back toward the edge of the city, where the sand seems to press closer, almost impatient to reclaim the land. But what you're heading toward next seems to defy everything you've come to expect from a desert. You see it from afar, a low, wide dome, shaped like a scoop of hardened cream, rising out of the earth like a secret waiting to be unwrapped. There are no windows, no decorative tiles, just thick curved walls tapering up to a flat-topped point. It looks like something built by desert-dwelling hobbits, or a spaceship that decided to settle down. You approach, and what you found is a yakchal, literally ice pit in Persian. Yes, an ice house in the desert. You walk the perimeter. The walls feel oddly cold, despite the sun baking them. They're made from a mix called saruj, a blend of clay, sand, ash, lime, and goat hair that's waterproof, heat-resistant, and somehow manages to insulate like a boss. It's the ancient Persian version of whatever works. Let's mix it together and see. At the rear of the dome, a narrow entry slopes downward, leading into the structure's base. You duck in, and the air hits you, chilled, like stepping into a cave during a storm. Not quite frigid, but undeniably cool. Your body registers it before your mind does. Your eyes take a moment to adjust, and then you see it. A hollow pit in the center of the floor, deeper than you expected. Inside, blocks of ice stacked like treasure, melting slightly, but still stubbornly intact. You stare in disbelief. This isn't magic. This is physics, strategy, and seasonal patience. Here's your mainstream history bite. Persian engineers used yakchals as early as 400 BCE to store ice year-round, especially for royalty and for ceremonial events. These domes were built near qanats, or seasonal runoff channels. In winter, workers would direct water into shallow shaded pools. Overnight, desert temperatures could drop enough to freeze the water naturally. The ice would then be hauled into the yakchal and buried beneath layers of straw and insulation. You might wonder, how did the ice not melt instantly? Simple. Everything in a yakchal is designed to fight heat. The thick walls, the underground pit, the reflective color of the dome, the north-facing entrance, and the dry desert air all combine to create an environment where ice can survive months into summer. And here's your fringe tidbit. Some yakchals weren't just for ice. They stored dairy, fruits, even bodies in preparation for funerals, like a prehistoric walk-in fridge/pantry/morgue. Efficient, if slightly spooky. You circle the interior and run your fingers across the walls. They're dry to the touch, but cool. So cool. It's the kind of temperature that makes you whisper without knowing why. Your breath clouds just slightly in the air, like you've stepped into winter's pocket. As you sit near the edge of the ice pit, a soft hum flows past your ears, air moving in and out through tiny vents near the base. These weren't afterthoughts. They were deliberate, cross-ventilation systems designed to prevent condensation buildup and keep the interior air fresh. You start to realize just how genius this is. In modern times, we use compressors and freon. These folks use shade, slope, wind, water, and silence. No humming machines, no monthly bills, just brains, bricks, and cold resolve. Outside again, the sun slaps your face like a moody teenager. But inside the yakchal, the cold lingers on your clothes. You take one last look back and can't help but imagine an ancient engineer, hands on hips, nodding proudly as the ice stayed solid another month longer. Historians still argue about the origins of yakchals. Some say the technique came from the Median Empire. Others point to Babylonian influence. A few outliers argue it all began with ancient mountain cults worshipping snow as divine. Honestly, if your entire civilization is waiting on puddles to freeze so you can have a decent summer worshipping, snow kind of makes sense. You head back toward the city, imagining how it must have felt to be a child in ancient Persia, summoned to the palace courtyard on the first day of summer. A servant hands you a bowl of ice shards flavored with fruit, syrup. Cold touches your lips in a world where heat is law, and suddenly your empire feels invincible. Now, just for fun, imagine explaining this to someone in medieval Europe. Oh yes, we keep ice in the desert. Just build a 20-foot dome, dig a pit, wait for winter to do its thing, and then nature handles the rest. Their eyebrows would have frozen before the water did. You pass another, smaller yakchal, used by commoners, its entrance partially hidden behind dried reeds. Not as grand, not as cold, but still functional. Because this technology wasn't just for kings. It was for everyone. The village, the healer, the traveling merchant with warm goat milk to preserve. And when the winds howl too hot and the fields crack from thirst, the yakchal endures. Quiet, round, cool as a sigh in the fat's middle of the furnace. You're starting to get the sense that nothing in ancient Persia was done halfway. Every corner, every wall, every crack in the architecture served a purpose, mostly a cool one. And now that you've seen the Yakchal, that desert-defying igloo of wonder, you start to wonder, how exactly did they make ice? Not just store it, not just stumble upon it, but create it, because even with a freezer dome, you still need ice to put in it. So let's time travel to the coldest desert nights of the Persian winter. Not that they happened often, but when they did, ancient engineers knew exactly what to do. You find yourself at the edge of the city again, in a broad, open field just beyond the reach of tall buildings. It's a shallow basin, lined with a smooth, dark plaster. It looks like a drained pool, the kind of place you'd expect kids to skateboard in, if skateboards existed in 500 BCE and the local priest didn't frown on fun. But this isn't for play. This is an ice-making field known as a Baf Sazan by some historians. Literally, a snowmaker, you crouch near the edge. By day, the field bakes in the sun. But by night, when desert temperatures plunge into the low 30s or even high 20s Fahrenheit, this basin becomes a freezing tray. Here's how it works. Water is poured into the shallow basin at night. The layer is thin, only a few inches deep, so it freezes quickly when exposed to cold air. But the real genius is in the setup. The basin is always surrounded by high walls on the east, west, and north to block sunlight. Open to the south, so the winter sun warms it just enough during the day to melt the top layer, if needed. Slightly sloped, so the frozen layer can be skimmed off and collected. You walk along the rim and find stone stairs leading down to the basin floor. You touch the plaster, it's cool, even in the daylight. The color? Deep gray. It absorbs heat during the day and radiates it away faster at night, creating the perfect conditions for freezing. And this isn't some backyard experiment. Persian engineers could produce hundreds of ice blocks per night using this method. Entire teams would work before dawn, skimming the frozen sheets off the basin surface and hauling them, carefully, reverently, toward nearby yakchals. You squint toward the horizon and spot them, rows of donkeys and carts, creaking under the weight of freshly frozen slabs, wrapped in straw and canvas, making their way to the city. Ice delivery, circa 500 BCE. Mainstream historical moment. This entire process represents one of the earliest examples of passive refrigeration on a mass scale. Long before modern cold chains and delivery trucks, ancient Persians were supplying cities with ice for storage, medicine, food preservation, and ceremonial use. But here's your quirky side note. Some festivals actually revolved around the arrival of the first summer ice. Imagine a public square full of people clapping as servants present a giant shimmering block of snow-crusted glory in a desert. It must have felt like witnessing a miracle, and, to be honest, still kind of does. Historians still argue whether this exact technique originated in Persia. Some point to early Chinese texts describing similar shallow freezing methods. Others cite Roman snow pits in the Alps. But Persia combined the techniques, scaled them, and made them part of city-wide infrastructure. You sit on the stone stairs, imagining how precise the timing had to be. One mistake, pouring too much water, starting too late at night, skimming too early, and the entire batch was ruined. These weren't just laborers. They were desert meteorologists, guessing wind patterns, calculating lunar temperatures, and adjusting methods for every microclimate. Now, let's pause for a moment and think big picture. This wasn't about luxury. This was about life. In ancient Persia, access to ice meant a better chance of survival for the sick, more food for the community, cooler homes for the elderly. A healer could numb pain with an ice rag. A merchant could sell preserved herbs weeks later. A child with heat stroke, saved by a single shard of snow. You make your way toward a smaller basin, clearly used for training or private use. Nearby, you spot a stone marker with notches, each representing a winter where ice failed to freeze. There aren't many marks. That's how well they mastered this. At the far end of the field, a woman in a layered robe gently pours water from a clay jug into a rectangular channel. She catches you watching and smiles. "Tonight will be cold," she says. "We'll fill the rest by moonrise." You nod, and something clicks in your modern brain. They were making ice the same way nature does, with wind, darkness, and just enough hope. And then there's the human part, because even the coldest process had its warmth. Workers sang songs as they collected ice. Families placed bets on how thick it would freeze. Children sometimes carved shapes in the frost before it was skimmed. In the middle of all this engineering brilliance, there was play. As dusk settles, the wind changes. The temperature begins to dip. You stand at the edge of the basin, watching the water begin its quiet transformation. No buzz, no coils, no switches. Just physics, poetry, and patience. You close your eyes. You swear you can hear the faint crackle of ice forming. Somewhere behind you, a donkey brays, waiting for his morning shift. And beneath your feet, the desert prepares to make snow. You wake before sunrise. The air is different now. Cool, dry, and just a little shy. The kind of air that doesn't want to be noticed. You stretch, blink the last dreams out of your eyes, and walk toward the basin you visited last night. And there it is. A sheet of delicate ice glinting like crushed glass under the early morning sky. You crouch beside it, run a finger along the top, and feel the miracle up close. It's smooth, just a few millimeters thick. Fragile, like it's afraid to exist in a place like this, but it's real, and it's everywhere. The entire basin is coated in shimmering silence. Workers arrive with baskets padded with straw. They move like clockwork. No shouting, no stumbling, just the quiet confidence of people who've done this every winter of their lives. They begin to skim the ice, breaking it into large panels and sliding them carefully onto wooden sledges. Then comes the packing, layer after layer of straw, insulating the ice like a mummy wrapped for summer survival. It's mesmerizing to watch, but you're not here to stay. The sun is about to climb again, and you're already walking into the next chapter of this chilled saga. The air itself. Because as clever as it is to freeze water in the desert, it's arguably more impressive to move air the way these ancient Persians did. You're led back toward the city by an older man, one of the ice harvesters. He says little, but waves for you to follow as he disappears between walls of mud brick that stretch 5, 10, 12 feet high. They form a narrow alley. The ground beneath your feet shifts from sand to clay tile. And then you feel it. Air, but not the hot kind. This breeze is narrow, directional, like it knows where it's going. You realize you've stepped into the path of an ancient airflow system built right into the very streets. This is where the real design genius kicks in. Every angle, slope, and stone in Persian architecture serve to guide air, like a lazy river made of wind. Here's a mainstream fact. For your toolkit, Persian cities were designed around airflow, not just homes. Entire street systems were aligned to capture wind from prevailing directions, often the north or northeast. Walkways were kept narrow to create Venturi effects. That's when air is forced through tight spaces and speeds up, naturally cooling as it does. You're experiencing it right now. You press your back against the wall, close your eyes, and feel it whip gently across your cheeks. It carries the scent of dust and stone, but also something floral. Basil, maybe. Or rose. You turn a corner and find yourself in a multi-level courtyard. The space is open to the sky, but ringed with balconies and overhangs. Hanging from the walls are woven mats soaked in water, dripping slowly into channels below. When the wind passes through them, the water evaporates, and the breeze cools even more. It's passive cooling, amplified. The Persians weren't just catching wind, they were taming it. Here's your fringe tidbit of the hour. Some historians believe Persian architects used sound and smell to design airflow paths. They'd burn incense or play flutes in certain areas and watch how the smoke or sound moved, like ancient wind sensors. This helped them design with nature instead of against it. And yes, that does make them feel more like airbending monks than bricklayers. Inside one of the homes bordering the courtyard, you spot more airflow tricks. Vents placed at floor level allow cool air in from the basement, while high slits near the ceiling let warm air escape. The walls are thick, not just for insulation, but to act as thermal batteries, soaking up heat during the day and releasing it slowly at night. You walk past a series of angled ducts hidden in the architecture, almost invisible unless you're looking for them. They run behind the walls like secret passageways for air. Some even have baffles, internal stones designed to direct and slow airflow, preventing drafts while maintaining freshness. It's like walking through the inside of a handmade air conditioner that runs on logic and dreams, and then you see it, the Taylor. A long, open hall elevated slightly above the garden. It has columns on 3 sides, with a tall roof and no walls. This is where noble families lounge during summer days, shaded, breezy, and surrounded by plants. The placement is no accident. The Taylor always faces the direction of the prevailing wind, with openings behind it that allow the breeze to pass completely through the space. It's like sitting in a natural wind tunnel, but the kind designed for reading poetry, sipping sherbet, and dramatically sighing while looking into the distance. Historians still argue how much of this design was intentional science versus intuitive adaptation. Did they have airflow diagrams and temperature models? Or did they just build, tweak, and build again? Whatever the truth, the results speak fluently in Fahrenheit. You lean against a marble column, gazing out over the garden. The breeze moves past your ears like a lullaby. It's not loud. It doesn't gust. It just exists, constant and reliable, like a heartbeat beneath stone. A small child runs past you chasing a cloth kite, laughing, and you feel the tug of wind on your own clothes. It's gentle, thoughtful, almost personal. You turn and walk down a short staircase into the sardab, the cellar. Inside, it's noticeably cooler. This isn't just the absence of heat, it's the presence of design. The air here has travelled from the courtyard, passed through moist mats, bounced off clay walls, and descended through ducts like a trained dancer. And now it rests, right here, cooling sacks of dried fruit and pottery jars of butter. Someone offers you a cup of cold mint tea. You sip it slowly, eyes closed, listening to the wind murmur through vents above. You're not in a house, you're in a machine, a living one, a breathing one, and its fuel is the wind, its secret is patience, and its product is comfort. And somehow, in the middle of this unforgiving desert, you feel more comfortable than you did this morning. That's the magic of Persian design. You're beginning to think the ancient Persians didn't just survive the desert, they negotiated with it, traded shadows for peace, offered up geometry and patience in exchange for a little breeze and a bearable afternoon. Nowhere is that more evident than in the spaces you're walking through now. Not grand palaces, not underground tunnels, but the long-shaded verandas, porches, and covered arcades that seem to stretch from every corner of the city. You follow a narrow alley and step into what seems like another open courtyard, but something's different. The air feels cooler before you even step inside. Then you realize why. The entire perimeter is wrapped in arcades, those long covered walkways supported by column after column, casting the kind of shadow that makes you sigh audibly. These weren't afterthoughts. These were intentional temperature zones, wrapped around buildings like a scarf on a chilly day. Except here, the goal is to beat the heat, not the cold. Each arch is deep, deeper than you'd expect. That's not by accident. Persian architects understood the sun's angles, especially in summer. The deeper the arch, the longer it would cast shade during the worst part of the day. Some walkways had double-height arches, high enough to let air circulate above you while keeping sunlight off your face. You step beneath one of them. Immediately, you feel relief. You look down and see the tiles on the ground, arranged in patterns that are more than just decorative. Some are matte, others glazed. The glossy ones reflect heat. The matte ones absorb moisture from the air at night and cool slightly as the day warms up. That's thermal logic disguised as interior design. Mainstream fact: these long-shaded corridors, especially those in mosques, madrasas, and bazaars, were built not only for comfort, but for function. A merchant could display cloth and spices without them curling from the heat. A student could sit for hours with a manuscript. A traveller could sleep beside a stone column without burning through their robe. Then comes the quirky historical gem. In certain cities like Yazd or Kashan, some arcades were designed with optical illusions. Arches closer to the centre of the walkway were subtly narrower or taller than the ones near the end, making the shaded corridor appear longer or shorter, depending on the time of day. Why? Some say it was aesthetic. Others believe it was psychological, a way to make shaded distances seem less daunting, kind of like the ancient version of adding lo-fi beats to your architectural commute. You follow the arcade around the edge of the courtyard and into a public square. Here, things open up. And what do you notice first? That the shade is arranged, on purpose. It's not haphazard. Buildings cast long shadows across water channels, deliberately placed where wind would pass through, cooling the air before it reaches the bustling centre. You step onto one of the shaded benches and feel the temperature difference, easily 10 degrees cooler, maybe more. The sunlight glares just a few feet away, but here, you're in the comfort zone. A boy walks by carrying a woven palm leaf screen, rolling it down a column like an ancient window blind. It blocks the light, but not the air. Genius. Let's not forget the psychological angle. In desert regions, shade wasn't just a comfort, it was sacred. In Zoroastrian tradition, sunlight was divine, yes, but so was the balance between light and shadow. To live wisely in such a climate was to understand that the absence of sun could be just as life-giving as its presence. Historians still argue over whether these beliefs influenced city planning or whether practicality simply led to spirituality. Either way, you now realize that walking through these shaded spaces isn't just cooling, it's calming. You pause beneath a particularly wide overhang where several people sit in quiet conversation. No one's rushing. The rhythm of life slows in the shade. Speech becomes softer, movements lazier. Even laughter sounds cooler here. A woman hands you a fan made of reeds, and you wave it once. The air under the arcade moves differently, less chaotic, more refined. You could almost believe this was designed by an architect who trained under the wind itself. You continue through the arcade and stumble upon a marketplace. Here, the use of shade is turned up to 11. Canvas canopies stretch between buildings, crisscrossed like sails on an ancient ship. Some are soaked in water to add evaporative cooling. Others are simply dyed light colors, reflecting sunlight, instead of absorbing it. Vendors sit behind stone counters that stay cool even in the midday sun. Bowls of fruit sit on beds of wet straw. Even the layout of the stalls seems intentional, angled away from direct sunlight, with ventilation slits in the walls to guide airflow like desert air traffic control. You feel something brush your shoulder, a passing breeze that sneaks under the canopy and slides between the walls. It lifts a few paper scrolls and makes a hanging cloth flap lazily. You follow it. It leads to another arcade, another shaded bench, another moment of quiet, and then comes the callback. Remember that breeze that greeted you outside the palace? Walls? It's here again, familiar, soft, and persuasive. So here's what you've learned. Shade isn't just a lack of light, it's an ancient strategy, a tactical retreat from heat, a gift of design that lets people breathe, move, exist, even thrive under a sky that would otherwise burn them out of existence. And somehow, the more you walk through these shaded spaces, the more you notice your own breathing slowing, your footsteps getting softer. You're not just cooler, you're calmer. You sit once more, under an arch so tall it makes you feel small in a good way. And as the breeze passes again, brushing, your skin like a story told in silence. You realize this isn't just architecture, it's a lullaby in stone. By now, you're used to being surprised. You've walked through palaces that breathe, streets that steer the wind, and domes that hoard winter in their bellies like secret treasure. You've tasted ice in a desert, sat in shaded arcades designed to slow the world down. But what if I told you that the dead got to enjoy that same luxury? You're headed now to the edge of the city, where the living thin out and silence thickens. The sun is just starting to lower in the sky, casting long, gold fingers across mud brick walls. A winding path leads you past a line of flowering shrubs, fragrant though dusty, until you arrive at an open gate carved into a thick, quiet wall. Beyond it, a mausoleum. Stone domes, tiled walkways, calm air, and, somehow, a familiar coolness. You expected stillness. But what you didn't expect was design. The main hall of the mausoleum is tall, circular, and beautifully eerie. Pale blue tiles climb the walls in delicate geometric waves. High above, open slits allow light to drip down like melted silver. Not too much, just enough to show you that the air here moves. Slowly, respectfully, you step inside. The temperature drops. Again and again, you're not alone. Not in the ghostly sense. Don't worry, no jump scares tonight, but in the architectural one. Because even here, where no one's expected to get up and complain about the heat, the air still flows. Mainstream fact of the moment, many ancient Persian mausoleums and tombs were designed with passive cooling in mind. Not just to preserve the stone or keep flowers from wilting, but because the respect shown to the dead mirrored the care given to the living. You walk slowly between stone sarcophagi, placed beneath small wind catchers built right into the mausoleum's structure. But hi, vents aren't big, but they're cleverly angled, just enough to allow rising hot air to escape, and for a gentle pull of wind to keep the interior dry and cool. Moisture was the enemy of preservation. And heat? Well, it's nobody's friend when you're trying to honor the departed. You pause at a large tomb marked by faded calligraphy. A trickle of breeze moves past your face again. Where is it coming from? You crouch, run your hand along the base of the wall, and feel it. A vent, narrow, almost hidden, connected to a buried qanat that's long since dried up, but was once the source of cool, clean air drifting through this sacred space. You're standing inside a structure that's part cooling system, part cathedral, part climate-controlled time capsule. The caretaker notices your fascination and smiles. They built for eternity, he says, and even the wind was invited to stay. And here's your quirky historical tidbit. In some regions, families of the deceased would spend hot afternoons inside these mausoleums, not just to pray, but to rest, read, or reflect. Some even brought tea. There are 13th century travel accounts describing people lounging comfortably among tombs while the world boiled outside. Weird? Maybe. Beautiful? Definitely. It was a cultural truth that airflow meant peace. And nowhere did peace matter more than in a place where souls were expected to rest forever. Historians still argue how much engineering went into these designs intentionally. Some believe it was mostly aesthetic, a byproduct of domes and thick walls. Others insist there was clear purpose. Air channels were mapped, towers placed strategically, and slits carved with wind flow in mind. You'll hear both views in a dusty university library debate. But down here, standing inside the silent cool of this stone haven, it's hard not to believe in purpose. The sun outside sinks lower. You step back into the evening light, blinking at the sudden warmth. Even now, the wind catchers above the mausoleum whistle faintly. They're still working, still honoring. You walk further down the path. A smaller tomb stands half buried in sand. Its walls are cracked, but the badgia above is intact. And, yes, you feel it. A stream of soft air escaping the top like the ghost of a breath. You place your hand at the opening, and it's warm air that exits, proof that cooler air must still linger inside, being drawn upward, pulled out by a design older than most languages still spoken. Another callback finds you here. Remember the qanats under the city, and how they fed cool air into homes. Some of those same channels ran beneath graveyards, passing under mausoleums. It wasn't always intentional, but when they discovered the effect, they built around it, preserved it, honored it. You find a bench nearby, stone, naturally, and sit down. The breeze from the mausoleum's tower brushes your arm again. You glance around. Still no tourists, no crowds, just the low hum of wind in old stone. And that's when it hits you. The dead didn't just get peace, they got climate control. Not for vanity, not for comfort, but because in Persia, good air was sacred, and sacred things don't stop working just because no one's watching. You're back in the heart of the city now, walking through one of its quieter neighborhoods. The sun has eased into its late afternoon slouch, less aggressive now, like a lion that's already eaten. You hear the faint echo of sandals scuffing clay tiles, someone splashing water in a courtyard. And then, drifting through the air like a dream, the scent of flowers. But not just any flowers. You follow your nose around a corner and find yourself in a private garden. The gate is ajar. No one stops you. Maybe you're expected. Or maybe, here in ancient Persia, everyone's invited to inhale with purpose. Because this isn't just a garden. It's an olfactory playground. Rows of rose bushes, thick with petals, line the perimeter. Mint creeps underfoot, spreading its cool perfume. And in the center of the garden stands something you've never seen before. A stone tunnel, low to the ground, with slits along the top. Water trickles through it. And from those slits, perfumed air rises. Yes, perfumed air. This, my sleepy friend, is the Persian invention that somehow makes desert heat smell luxurious. You lean closer and peer into the tunnel. It runs beneath a row of clay basins filled with water, rose petals, and bundles of herbs. The heat of the day warms the basins slightly, not enough to cook them, but just enough to cause gentle evaporation. As wind moves across the top of the basins, it carries the scent through channels, out the slits, and directly into the surrounding courtyard. That soft breeze brushing your cheek. It smells like a hug in a teacup. Mainstream historical fact. Perfumed ventilation was a regular feature in the homes of the Persian elite, particularly during the Achaemenid and later Safavid periods. Gardens were designed not just for aesthetics or food, but for their role in scent distribution. Plants were placed strategically along air paths, near vents, and around shaded corridors. They weren't just growing flowers, they were composing the air. You follow a narrow corridor lined with clay jugs. Inside each, petals float gently on the surface of water. Some jugs are topped with perforated lids, aroma diffusers made from porous clay. The air picks up moisture, scent, and coolness all at once. And yes, this was functional, not just pleasant. In dry air, scents travel faster. In slightly humidified, cool air, they linger longer, which means every passing breeze becomes a moment of calm, an inhalation of something that says, you're okay. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit. Some historians believe that scented air was used as a status signal. The richer the household, the more elaborate the blend. Not just rose or mint, but saffron, cardamom, and even crushed almond blossom. So if your home smelled like a spice market in spring, you were basically the Beyoncé of ancient Persia. You step into an indoor hallway where vents near the ceiling open into small clay pots set within the wall. You sniff. Yep, still perfumed. These pots were loaded with petals in the morning and replaced each evening. The trick was balance. Too strong, and it overwhelmed. Too faint, and it felt like failure. Persian households prided themselves on just enough scent to notice, but not enough to explain. At the end of the hallway, you find an elevated seating area, half inside, half outside. A servant places a clay cup in front of you. Rose water, chilled. with a sliver of ice pulled from the family's yakchal earlier that morning. You sip it. It's cold, floral, and impossibly calming, and the air around you carries the same gentle note. Rose and water, wind and shadow. This is where you begin to understand something deeper. Persian cooling wasn't just about temperature. It was about sensation, about wrapping the body in softness when the world outside was sharp and scorching, about combining scent, sound, and air to create what can only be described as emotional cooling. Historians still argue how scientific this all was. Did they know about air density, thermodynamics, scent molecules? Probably not in modern terms. But did they understand that smell affects stress, that breezes affect mood, that roses smell better when you're not sweating through your tunic? Absolutely. A child passes by with a small bundle of herbs tied with twine. She tosses them into one of the clay pots by the vent. Just like that, the scent shifts. Slightly greener, sharper now. Basil and tarragon, maybe. You smile. This isn't perfume in the modern sense. It's air care, curated air, an experience for the lungs. And here's a callback for you. Remember the palace's tailor, open on 3 sides. Some had vine-covered trellises placed around them, not just for shade, but to scent the wind. The entire space became a theatre, for air. You finish your rosewater, set the cup down, and lean back. The breeze moves past you again. Not strong, not showy, but cool, scented, and so subtle it feels like a secret shared only with you. So let's summarize what you've just inhaled. Air was cooled. Air was scented. Air was delivered to your skin, your lungs, your heart. And it all happened without a single switch. You rise and take one last walk through the perfumed corridor, the clay pots sighing their aromas into the space. And just before you exit, a final whisper of wind brushes your shoulder. It smells like home. You leave the perfumed corridor with your senses still tingling. The air, still cool and faintly floral, follows you like a friend who doesn't want to say goodbye. But now it's time to explore something you've likely taken for granted your whole life: clothing. Yes, clothes. You've heard the phrase, dress for the weather, but the ancient Persians didn't just follow it, they perfected it. In a land where the sun could cook an egg on your forehead before breakfast, what you wore wasn't just about modesty or fashion, it was engineering. You walk into a shaded courtyard where fabric flutters in the breeze, rows of linen, cotton, and fine wool hanging from lines, like laundry day in heaven. A weaver waves you toward a shaded bench, and there she spreads out a selection of robes, cloaks, and wraps. You reach out and touch one. It's cool. Not in the trendy sense, though. Yes, these ancient Persians had style, but physically, the fabric itself is cool. Even in the heat, it breathes, it moves, it shields without suffocating. It's not just something you put on, it's something you partner with to survive the day. Mainstream history moment. Ancient Persian garments, especially during the Achaemenid era, around 550–330 BCE, were designed with layering in mind, not heavy European, pile it on till you're a quilt layering. Think light, airy, breathable layers, each serving a purpose. One layer to reflect sunlight, another to catch sweat, another to trap cooler air next to the skin. Genius, right? You, try one on. It's long, loose, with wide sleeves and a draped collar. It doesn't cling. It doesn't trap. It feels like being gently hugged by a cloud that's been watching the weather for centuries. You walk through the workshop, and a tailor shows you how they stitched certain vents into the sides and backs of tunics, often under decorative patterns. These weren't just for fashion. They were built-in airflow systems. Sit down. The vents flare open. Walk fast. Air slips through like whispers through reeds. Even the colours were chosen for survival. Light blues, off-whites, soft greens. Not just for beauty, but to reflect heat. Darker dyes were saved for cooler seasons or evening wear. And yes, you better believe there were evening robes for sitting under the stars, sipping iced pomegranate drinks in your yak-chul-cooled courtyard. Ancient Persians weren't just engineers, they were vibe curators. Now here's your quirky fringe detail. Some believe the Persians pioneered what we'd now call moisture-wicking fabrics. Textiles like loosely spun cotton and flax were chosen for their ability to absorb sweat and then dry quickly, reducing skin irritation in the dry heat. Kind of like an early prototype for your modern dry-fit t-shirt, but with 100% more elegance. And don't forget the headgear. You're handed a soft turban, nothing too tight, nothing stuffy, just a long strip of linen wrapped expertly to keep the sun off your scalp and the wind from drying your skin to parchment. But there's more. In certain noble circles, turban folds were designed to trap cool air, creating a mini air buffer between your skull and the searing sky. Airborne insulation. On your head, that's right. One older weaver shares a fun fact as she folds a tunic. Some robes had pockets filled with dried herbs or scented cloth, so when the wind passed through, it carried perfume along with it. That's not just fashion, that's airborne aromatherapy. You ask her how often people wash these garments in such a dry land. She laughs. We dust them, shake them, hang them in shade with rosewater mist. Sometimes we wash. Mostly, we care. You nod, because suddenly it all makes sense. These weren't disposable clothes. They were tools, rituals, lifesavers. Historians still argue how much of Persian clothing design was based on science versus cultural tradition. Some say the use of specific cuts and colours came from observation, trial and error in different climate zones. Others argue there were formalised schools of textile production with real knowledge passed between generations. Either way, it worked. You walk past a group of travellers resting beneath an arcade. Each is wearing a slightly different style of robe, some more tailored, others more relaxed. But they all share the same principles. Wide sleeves for ventilation, layered drapery for airflow control, head coverings for shade, light colours to bounce the sun away. And then there's footwear. You slip off your sandals and inspect them. The soles are thick, made of pressed plant fibre and leather, good for insulating against the hot earth. But the straps? Simple. Just enough to hold the shoe in place without creating hot spots or trapping sweat. Because nobody wants swamp toes in the desert. Let's take a step back in your excellent sandals and appreciate the full picture. The walls cooled the buildings. The basins cooled the air. The yak-chul cooled the food. And your clothing cooled you. That's not a passive system. That's a body-aware cooling ecosystem, refined through centuries of practical experience and cultural pride. You sit on a low bench while the wind moves gently through your new robe. It's simple, really, just physics and fabric. But it feels like magic. A young girl waves to you from the far end of the courtyard. She's carrying a small bowl of herbs and dips them briefly in water before laying them across a windowsill. Another lesson: evaporative cooling and aromatic layering done by instinct. You inhale, stand, and begin walking again. Slower now. Your steps quieter. Your posture more relaxed. You're not just dressed like a Persian. You're living like one. And somewhere along the way, you realize your body temperature's dropped. Your heartbeat's calmed. The wind, the robe, the breeze through vents and corridors. It's all working together to cradle you in comfort. Not artificially. Not forcefully. Just beautifully and softly. Just like the rest of this remarkable civilization. The breeze tugs at your robe now like an old friend guiding you gently by the sleeve. You've explored the palaces, the perfumes, the underground ice bunkers, and even the serene mausoleums where cool air hums around the stillness of the dead. But what about the common folk? The people who didn't have servants to soak their door curtains or rosewater fountains burbling in courtyards? Because for all its majesty and marvel, Persia was not just kings and scholars. It was families, villages, bakers, Traders, potter makers, people like you, just trying to sleep through a heat wave without boiling like a rice pot left unattended. And tonight, you're stepping into the heart of a humble Persian neighborhood, tucked within sun-baked alleyways, just wide enough for two goats and a borrowed breeze to pass through side by side. The homes here are modest, single-story mud brick structures, many with flat roofs and thick walls. The doors are wooden, the windows narrow, and yet you feel it. That familiar air movement, that barely there chill in the back of your throat. Even here, especially here, air is being shaped, nudged, coaxed into cooperation. You enter a small courtyard house. The family greets you with warm smiles and cool mint water. The temperature inside, surprisingly pleasant. No badgers, no domes, no luxury ice chests. What's their secret? The matriarch leads you to the roof, where the answer becomes clear. A simple opening in the ceiling, called a daraktan in some regions. A rectangular shaft, maybe 3 feet wide, cut directly above the central room below. On the hot side of the roof, a small vent is propped open, covered in wet cloth. The hot air from inside rises and escapes, while air from the shaded rooftop courtyard is pulled down through the shaft. It's the stack effect, made beautifully basic. In the evening, the family wets down the rooftop with buckets of water. As it evaporates, the air cools. That cool air settles across the roof, and the downward shaft pulls it into the home like a straw sips lemonade. You lean into the shaft and feel it, a gentle downdraft. No machinery, just smart physics and damp tiles. Here's your mainstream history moment. In many working-class Persian homes, especially in cities like Yazd, rooftop living was a survival strategy. During the hottest nights, families would sleep on the roof, sometimes on wet blankets, beneath reed mats or star-flecked skies. Some homes even had retractable canvas covers to shield against wind or offer privacy. A rooftop bedroom without walls, but with airflow privileges. You lie back against the roof tiles and gaze upward. The stars are out now. The Milky Way glows, faintly above a skyline dotted with chimneys and wind towers. But even in this simpler home, the temperature is perfectly survivable. You hear a child giggling nearby. 2 brothers are lying on their backs, holding hands in the air and pretending to catch stars. Their mother walks over with a jug of water and sprinkles it across the roof. Not much, just enough to dampen the surface, to encourage evaporation. Within moments, the air around you feels cooler. That's when she smiles and says, "We borrow from the sky when the earth burns." You don't know if that's a saying or something she made up on the spot, but it might be the most beautiful thing you've heard all day. Here's your quirky fringe fact. In some parts of rural Persia, clay pots filled with wet reeds were placed under the family's bed platform. Not only did this add moisture to the air, but it cooled the sleeping surface directly. In especially hot regions, families would dig shallow trenches beneath their homes, fill them with water, and allow natural airflow to pass over them and into the sleeping space through vents. Basically, DIY geothermal AC. And the walls, they're doing their part too. Mud brick isn't just cheap, it's miraculous. These thick, porous walls absorb the day's heat slowly and release it even slower. So, by the time the sun sets, the inner surface of the wall is just beginning to warm up, right when the outside air starts to cool. The result? A house that resists temperature, spikes like a passive bodyguard made of baked earth. You head back, downstairs, and sit near a small interior fountain. More of a basin, really, but it does the job. A single clay pipe dribbles water into it from a jug upstairs, and a thin film of moisture gathers across the surface. The air above it feels noticeably cooler. This basin isn't for display. It's a functional thermal anchor, and then comes the food. In the kitchen, a separate room but cleverly positioned at the west side of the house to catch less morning heat, you notice something fascinating. The clay oven is recessed below floor, level, keeping its heat mostly contained. The windows here are smaller near the ceiling, designed to vent heat upward and out. And even the cooking times are adjusted to the rhythm of the day. Meals are cooked before sunrise or after dusk. You sit down for a bite. Simple bread, some yogurt chilled in a shallow ceramic bowl, dates soaked in water and stored in a cellar-like niche. Everything is either cooled by design or served in a way that doesn't generate heat. And here's a callback for you. Remember those underground qanats? Some neighborhoods had shared access to small qanat vents. One stone lid opens in the corner of the courtyard, and you feel a draft. It's faint but consistent. That's all it takes. A few degrees less, a bit of air, a little in the middle of the ugh. Historians still argue about how widespread these passive techniques were among the lower classes. Some say the majority of homes had no real cooling strategies beyond rooftop sleep. Others argue that commoners developed the most sustainable and creative adaptations of all, precisely because they couldn't afford the luxury fixes. You're inclined to agree with the second camp, because as you sit in this small, humble home, sipping cool mint water, feet resting on a reed mat dampened with rose water, air gently flowing past your cheeks, you're struck not by the absence of technology, but by the presence of intention. Every stone, every vent, every pot and fabric and breeze, they all work together, not loudly, not dramatically, but in quiet, efficient harmony. And you're no longer sweating, you're resting. In the home of a common family who, without knowing modern science or owning a single fan, still managed to engineer comfort out of heat and habit. As the night deepens, you lie back on the mat with the family's two boys on either side. One falls asleep mid-sentence, the other is already dreaming. The stars overhead blink in approval, and somewhere in the distance, you hear the low whistle of a windcatcher. Even the rich air wants to stop by and say goodnight. It's early morning again. The light has barely cracked across the rooftops, and yet the city is already stretching its limbs, like a great clay giant shaking off the sleep of centuries. The heat hasn't kicked in yet, but you know it's coming. The sun's already eyeing the landscape, like it's about to set something on fire. Again. But today's walk will take you beyond the homes, the palaces, and the fountains. Today, you follow the soft sound of hooves clopping gently across baked earth. Because while the kings and the commoners were figuring out how to cool themselves, someone had to think about the animals. And in Persia, animals weren't afterthoughts. They were transportation, messengers, lifelines for trade, and yes, even climate partners. You trail a camel caravan as it lumbers slowly out of the city gates, heading toward the outskirts where a small caravanserai nestles beside a shaded grove. You wouldn't know it just by looking, but this compound is a natural cooling zone, designed as much for the beasts as for their owners. You step through a wide stone arch and immediately feel the change. Air shifts, light softens, and a thin layer of dust swirls like cinnamon in morning chai. The caravanserai is rectangular, with a central courtyard surrounded by covered walkways and stables built into thick walls. Each stall is shaded, the ceilings low enough to hold the cool but high enough to breathe. Inside, horses and camels rest on padded earth floors mixed with straw, not hay, but woven stalks that trap less heat and release moisture as they're gently sprayed down. A young stable hand shows you how the floors are angled, ever so slightly, to allow cleaning water to flow gently through the back channels, removing waste and cooling the room all in one go. Here's your mainstream historical fix. Persian caravanserais, roadside inns used by traders and travelers, were marvels of passive cooling design. Built every 30-40 kilometers along major routes, each was strategically placed near a water source or qanat, and constructed with thick, insulating walls, shaded animal quarters, and domed ceilings that minimized heat buildup. And guess what? The animals weren't an afterthought. They were a design priority. You peek into the camel stalls. Massive archways open to the east, closed on the west, where the sun would beat down hardest. The shaded side walls are lined with small clay vents near the base, drawing air in from underground or shaded courtyards. These animals, huge, hot, heavy, aren't just surviving the desert here. They're practically lounging. One camel huffs softly as you walk by, half dozing under a bundle of damp reed mats. Another is being washed by a groomer with a goatskin bladder of well water. The water is cool, very cool. You reach out, and the groom lets you splash a bit on your hands. Instantly refreshing. The air here isn't just tolerable, it's deliberately soothing. You walk further into the complex and find the courier station, where lean desert horses stand ready. Their stalls are shaded not by walls, but by woven palm leaf screens that allow air to pass, but block most light. Each stall has a water basin lined with porous stone, slowly dripping to maintain coolness. The horses drink often but not quickly. They seem trained to pace their hydration in rhythm with the desert itself. And now for your quirky tidbit. Some Persian stables were designed with built-in sweat catchers. These were shallow stone trenches beneath the animals, slightly lined with ash or sand, used to absorb sweat and control temperature and smell. On especially hot days, handlers would wet the ash to amplify evaporative cooling, not just for the animal, but for the people working beside them. Outside, in the loading courtyard, traders adjust saddlebags, checking to ensure clay jugs of water are wrapped in soaked cloth, then stored near vents built into the sides of the caravan carts. These vents are small and slanted, positioned to catch wind from one side and channel it past the water jugs. It's rudimentary, but it works. Portable air conditioning, powered by a camel's slow march and a stiff desert breeze. And here's a detail you'll love. Some elite trade caravans used goatskin or sheepskin water containers coated in a thin layer of clay and herbs. Not only did the clay cool the contents through evaporation, but the herbs, usually mint or basil, helped mask any animal taste in the water, cooling and flavoring, all without a kitchen. You climb into one of the transport wagons, and the trader proudly shows you their hidden air shelf, a raised wooden platform under the seat that allows airflow beneath cargo. No trapped heat, he says. Bad for figs. Figs. Of course. You pause to think about this. Even in the planning of how dates and nuts and herbs were transported, airflow and coolness were considered. Not because it was trendy, because it was essential. And while you sit in the back of that wagon, watching animals eat and breathe comfortably under the hot Persian sun, you can't help but recall human comfort came first, but never alone. In Persia, the breeze belonged to all. Historians still argue about how sophisticated these animal cooling strategies were. Some claim they were just adaptations of shelter design, not deliberately engineered. But others point to surviving architectural plans, trade route documentation, and even ancient poetry that describes the comfort of a rested beast. If the builders cared enough to write poems about air and camels, you better believe it was intentional. Even the rest stops along desert roads included shaded troughs, underground cisterns, and in some rare cases, shallow baths for oxen and donkeys. Can you picture a donkey spa day? Persia could. As the sun peaks now, and most animals are napping or standing in a communal shade area, lined with wet cloth, you find yourself slipping into a rhythm of rest too. You sit near the camel stalls, and the air here, damp, cool, faintly herbal, wraps around you. A passing groom offers you a bit of sun-dried yogurt, tangy and refreshing. It's been kept under layers of straw in a clay jar, cooled by the breeze, that moves constantly through the back corridors of the stables. You eat slowly. A horse nickers softly behind you. A sparrow flits overhead. A breeze tugs at your sleeve, gentle as ever. And in this moment, one undeniable truth settles into your skin. The Persians didn't build around the heat. They designed with the wind. Even their animals had better summers than most of us. The sky has turned the soft pink of a fig's inner flesh. You've seen Persian homes breathe, mausoleums exhale, and camels nap in handmade air tunnels. But now, just as the heat finally begins to slip from the edges of the earth, it's time to see where the day's warmth goes when the world finally lets go of it. You follow a dusty footpath past the final line of homes, stepping into the outskirts where architecture fades into geometry. No one builds randomly here. These spaces, humble as they seem, are part of a nightly ritual practiced for over 2,000 years, letting the heat go. You enter a wide open courtyard framed by tall walls. No roof, no doors, just stone, tile, and perfect stillness. This, my dear listener, is where Persian architecture gets poetic. Because while the sun has spent all day punishing the land, baking bricks, heating stones, and melting patience, the stars have a job too. Their job? To take the heat back. You sit in the courtyard. You feel it immediately. The temperature here is lower than the streets. Not because of some mystery potion, not because of hidden fans, because the walls are thick. The floor is tiled. The air is still. And most importantly, the heat is escaping. Up. This space is called a hauskane, or sometimes just a night court. It's not meant for grandeur. It's not even always meant for people. Sometimes it's for the house itself. These spaces were designed to absorb heat during the day and radiate it slowly back into the sky at night. A process called radiative, cooling, now a favorite of eco-engineers, but perfected by the Persians long before we had names for it. You lie back and place your hand against the tiles, still warm, but give it an hour. The tiles will cool, then begin pulling heat from everything around them. Walls, pots, clothes, even your body. All of it flows upward into the desert sky, where the dry, clear air acts like a vacuum, drawing away the day's fire. Mainstream historical fact. Persian architects used this principle deliberately. The thick materials used in floors and walls, mud brick, stone, tile, have a high thermal mass, which means they absorb and store heat energy. But what most people forget is that they also release it. And when the night air is dry and the sky is clear, they release that heat into the cosmos. It's as if the building itself is breathing out a sigh of relief. In wealthier homes, these open courtyards might include a central pool, not for swimming, but for reflecting the sky and helping radiate heat through water. On especially hot nights, the family would pour a thin layer of water over the tile floor, speeding the process. Even just a few millimeters of water would cool the entire space by morning. And here's a fringe tidbit. Some Persian astronomers believed that stars did more than light the night. They helped cool the earth, not metaphorically, literally. They called the stars the cold eyes of the sky, and it wasn't poetry. It was physics, observed through patience, repetition, and a lot of nights spent watching the earth breathe. You sit cross-legged on the edge of the courtyard's tiled platform. A boy passes with a jug of water and pours a small stream onto the tiles. Not for cleaning, for cooling. The water fans out in a thin film, and almost immediately you can feel the air temperature shift. That slow rise of cooler, denser air from below your feet. A passive exhale. Now, let's rewind for a moment. Remember the badgers, the wind catchers. During the day, they pull hot air out. At night, in some regions, they reverse. Warm interior air rises and exits through the tower, while cool air from the shaded courtyard below sinks into the home. The entire building flips its own lungs. Inhale, exhale, day, night, warm, cool, repeat. And the rooftops? You already know. Families slept there on summer nights. But did you know some rooftops were built sloped slightly toward the north to reduce exposure to lingering warmth from the western sunset? Or that certain materials were chosen because they cooled faster under starlight? It's not superstition. It's science disguised as folklore. You walk to a sidewall where potted plants line the edge. Not just for decoration. These are scented night coolers. Jasmine, basil, even a bit of mugwort. Plants chosen because they release stronger scents in cool air. When the temperature drops, the oils loosen, and the entire space becomes a scented breeze theatre. A woman sits nearby, weaving palm mats. She dips them in a shallow basin of water and spreads them out on the tiles beside her. By dawn, she says, they'll be cold enough to wrap the yogurt pots. You smile. Even the food gets a bedtime cooling routine. Here's another callback for you. Remember the yakchal? In some places, a yakchal dome was placed near a night court just for this reason, to capture maximum night cooling. The cooler the surrounding ground, the longer the stored ice could last. In extreme desert villages, you'd see families pouring water onto rooftop tiles every few hours at night, not for show, but to milk every ounce of cosmic chill they could. Historians still argue just how intentional this all was. Some call it instinctive architecture. Others insist it was deliberate, measured, studied. You've spent enough time in these spaces now to know the truth is probably both. Because what you see here isn't just reactive design, it's relational design. It's people who knew they couldn't beat the sun, so they befriended the night. You lie back again, palms pressed to the cooling tile, watching the stars blink their quiet approval. You hear someone humming in the next courtyard. You smell wet clay, jasmine, old stone, the kind of scents that only come out when the world slows down. And in this moment, a final realization takes root in you. Air conditioning is a machine, but cooling is an art. And the Persians, they were artists. Dawn again. This time, you don't wake to the sting of heat on your skin or the gritty sigh of the desert wind. You wake to the soft hush of silence doing its best impression of a lullaby. Around you, walls the color of warm bread rise up in serene stillness, touched only at the tips by the earliest rays of sun. The tiles beneath your back are cool and your breath comes easy. The night did its job, but as the light creeps over the city, a new player takes the stage in this endless dance of temperature and time, mud and brick. Not the glamorous stuff, not the glimmering tiles or scented pools, just dirt, shaped by hand, dried by sun, stacked by logic. The humblest material in Persian architecture, and also, perhaps, its most brilliant. You rise from the courtyard, stretch the sleep out of your spine, and follow a path toward a neighborhood built almost entirely of mud brick. At first glance, it looks like a monochrome village. Brown, beige, sandy red. No ornate carvings, no colorful domes. But step inside and you immediately understand. This town stays cooler than most fridges in a blackout. Why? Because mud brick remembers. Each home here is built from sun-dried clay bricks, thick and irregular, stacked into walls nearly 3 feet deep. These bricks aren't just structural. They're thermal batteries, absorbing heat all day, storing it in their bellies, and then releasing it slowly when the outside air has cooled. By the time the hottest part of the afternoon rolls around, the interior of the house is still cool, like a forgotten cave kissed by wind. Mainstream fact. Mud brick construction is one of the oldest architectural techniques in the world, used in Persia since at least 6000 BCE. It's cheap, local, sustainable, and, here's the real kicker, perfectly suited for the desert climate. You enter one of these homes. No yakchal, no wind towers, no secret tunnels. And yet, it's perfectly cool. The ceiling is low but not oppressive, domed in places to encourage air circulation. The windows are small slits, placed high on the walls, not for views, but for cross-ventilation. Warm air rises, escapes through the upper vents. Cooler air enters from shaded entryways and inner courtyards. And the thick walls? They hold the cool like a secret. You place your palm on the inner wall. It's cold. Not just less hot. Genuinely, surprisingly cold. The homeowner chuckles softly. That wall's been in shade since last night, he says, still remembering it. You nod, thinking again of that phrase. The bricks remember. He shows you around his home, a simple structure with a central room, a shaded side hallway, and a tiny back courtyard just large enough for a pomegranate tree and a stone basin. In the corner of the courtyard is a double wall structure. 2 brick walls built a foot apart with packed straw in between. Insulation, he says. My grandfather's idea. keeps the kitchen from turning into an oven when the stove's on. Fringe fact alert. In some rural Persian communities, people painted the exteriors of their homes with a special whitewash mixed with ash or egg whites, believed to increase reflectivity and reduce thermal absorption. Whether it actually worked or just looked clean is still debated, but the intent to cool is clear. Back inside, you're led to the sleeping quarters. No beds, just thick woven mats on a raised mud brick platform. Why raised? So air can circulate below you. Why woven? So your body can breathe. Why here against the northern wall? Because that's the coolest wall, always in shadow, always whispering. And remember the water tricks from earlier. This family has ceramic jugs sitting in corners, wide at the bottom and narrow at the top, keeping their drinking water cool through evaporation. One jug even has a damp cloth tied around it, with a small fan-shaped reed structure behind it to help direct air past the surface. This isn't fancy. This is grandmother-level wisdom, passed from calloused hands to careful minds. You step outside and explore the alleys of the mud brick village. They twist and turn, not randomly, but strategically, angled to maximize shade at all hours. Noon sun, narrow passageways. Morning sun, buildings block it. Afternoon sun, the outer walls are lined with storage rooms to act as heat buffers. Even the rooftops are clever. Some homes have depressed roof sections, basins where water is poured in the evening to encourage night cooling, similar to the open courtyards you've seen before. These basins reflect starlight and radiate heat away like mirrors pointed at the sky. You climb a ladder onto one of the rooftops. From up here, the village looks like a single sculpture, molded from the same lump of clay, stretched and carved into cooling elegance. And now the heat is beginning again. The sun has risen fully. The air starts to warm. But here, in this mud brick haven, it's slow, gentle, almost apologetic, because every wall, every room, every brick is holding the cool hostage, bargaining with the day. Here's a quirky anecdote. In Yazd, some residents used to press their palms to the outer wall each hour after dawn to listen to the heat, enter. They swore they could feel the transition, like the house exhaling one last breath of night before surrendering to the day. You test it. Your hand on the outer wall is warm, but still calm. Inside, the air is still cool. The delay is working. Historians still debate how intentional this thermal buffering was. Some argue that mud brick was just the cheapest material available. Others insist that Persians chose it because they understood it. They didn't need thermometers. They had elbows, noses, and memories. You believe the second theory? Because here you are, halfway through another desert morning, resting comfortably in a home with no wires, no buttons, no buzzing fans. And yet, you feel better than you have in any air-conditioned apartment back home. You take one last walk through the village, pausing at every turn to admire the simplest of miracles, how dirt and water shaped with care can protect you from the fiercest sun. No empire, no palace, just mud, memory, and mastery. And maybe that's the coolest thing of all. You step away from the cool embrace of mud brick homes and into a new kind of wonder. This time, it sparkles. Not the cold sparkle of ice or the playful twinkle of a Qanat stream. No, this sparkle belongs to the ground beneath your feet. You're walking on tiles, rows of them, laid across a palace entryway, a mosque courtyard, and even the floor of a bustling merchant shop. Blues so deep they echo the sky, greens like the heart of a fig leaf, and whites, cool, soft whites, reflecting the morning light as if trying to push it back into the sun. This isn't just art, it's engineering in disguise. Today, you're exploring how ancient Persians used tiles, not only for beauty, but to cool their spaces. You kneel to examine the tiles under your feet, smooth, cold, clean. Even in the rising heat of morning, they feel as though they've just been kissed by winter. Why? Because tile, specifically glazed ceramic tile, has a superpower. It doesn't retain heat like wood or clay. It reflects sunlight. It sheds warmth. And when laid across shaded courtyards or floors where water drips softly from fountains, it transforms that surface into a desert air conditioner. Mainstream historical fact: Persian tilework dates back over 3,000 years, reaching peak sophistication during the Seljuk and Safavid periods. While today we marvel at it for its artistry, floral motifs, calligraphy, and symmetry, its temperature-regulating properties were just as important. Courtyards were paved in specific colors and materials, not only to cool the air, but to cool the mind. You step into a prayer hall. The walls are tiled halfway up, blue and green fading into pale cream. It's darker here, and you can feel the shift in temperature, at least 5 degrees cooler. The tiles catch the breeze, bouncing it along the walls and allowing the air to move smoothly instead of bouncing off rough, heat-storing surfaces. In a small side chamber, a worker tends to a tile floor with a damp cloth. You notice the rhythm, not scrubbing, but dampening. "The tiles sweat for us," she explains. "When they're wet, they help the wind feel cooler." You touch one. It's true, a fine film of moisture, not puddled, but spread evenly, evaporates quickly under the warm air, and you swear the breeze brushing your face just cooled by a notch. This is evaporative cooling meets radiant design. Think of it as the forerunner of modern thermal tiles, but with more elegance and a lot more poetry. You wander out into a madrasa courtyard, where students once sat in circles of shade, studying texts with ink-stained fingers. The tiles here are different, glazed in patterns so specific they resemble mathematical puzzles. The color palette leans cool, never too dark, never too loud. And here comes your fringe tidbit. Persian scholars believed colors had a measurable effect on temperature and behavior. Blue for coolness and concentration, green for peace and shade, white for clarity. Some believed that rooms tiled in blue required less ventilation because the cool hues tricked the body into feeling more relaxed, even if the air temperature stayed the same. Now that's design with psychological precision. You rest by a low fountain in the center of the courtyard. The stone lip is lined with white and turquoise mosaic, each piece angled to catch water droplets and reflect them upward. The sun, softened by linen shades overhead, dances off the surface and flutters across the walls. The light doesn't sting, it plays. Historians still argue how much of this was planned for cooling versus aesthetics. Some say Persian architects just had a sense of harmony. Others point to ancient construction manuals that describe tile placement based on the direction of sun and wind, with diagrams marking color regions for different seasons. You take a moment to absorb this. In a time before electricity, people cooled entire complexes using nothing more than color, shade, and clever layering. A boy passes carrying a tray of fruit, his bare feet padding silently across the blue tile. He leaves no marks, just the sound of cool air curling in his wake. Behind him, his sister tosses a bucket of water over a section of shaded ground, not for cleaning. "It keeps the lizards away," she grins, "and the air sweet." That water, pooling briefly on the glazed floor, evaporates almost instantly, and, with it, heat disappears. You wander through more halls. Some are tiled only along the base, others floor to ceiling. But everywhere, the tile regulates temperature, directs airflow, and even dampens sound, creating an almost monastic calm. And let's not forget the spiritual dimension. In Zoroastrian and later Islamic traditions, cleanliness was next to sacredness. Smooth glazed tiles could be washed easily, kept cool, and made any prayer hall feel not just serene, but sanctified by breeze. You visit a bathhouse next. Inside, the walls and floors are tiled in deep green and dark cream, colors chosen for their cooling effect under steam. Even in this moist, warm space, there's no heaviness. The tiles reflect the heat away, and you feel the gentle pull of air rising through hidden ceiling vents, past surfaces that help guide it upward with minimum resistance. It's not just about being cool, It's about feeling light. And now for a callback. Remember the Taylor, that wide-open summer reception hall in Royal Estates? The floor was often tiled in alternating shades to create optical illusions of cool depth, like stepping across shaded pools. The same tricks used in grand spaces were echoed here in more public ones. You return to the mosque courtyard where your walk began. A gust of wind curls around the corner, glides across the tile, and wraps itself around your ankles. It's not much, but it's enough. The floor beneath you shines like still water. The air above it flows with intention, and as you walk, your feet stay cooler than they have any right to be in this desert sun. Because in Persia, even the ground learned to whisper, coolness is a choice, beauty is a function, and tile is everything. You step away from the tiled courtyards and back into the winding streets, still carrying the chill of blue mosaics on your skin. The sun has begun its usual afternoon tantrum, scattering heat like a spoiled prince, flinging golden coins, and, yet, you're oddly fine. Your robe moves with the wind, the alleys stay shaded, and you're walking toward a place that, in any other part of the world, would be avoided during peak heat. But not here. Not in ancient Persia, because this place, of all places, is cool by design. You're headed to a hammam, a Persian public bathhouse. Yes, a bathhouse, a place full of warm water, rising steam, and bodies basking in it. You'd think stepping inside would feel like being swallowed by a dragon's exhale. But no, the moment you cross the arched threshold, you notice the first miracle. It's cooler than the street. The entrance is low, the walls thick, and the air still. A vestibule where your shoes come off and time starts to slow. You sit briefly on a stone bench under an arched ceiling called a gonbad. Light trickles in through small coloured glass windows, and the floor beneath your feet is tiled and faintly damp, yet never slippery. You step forward through a narrow corridor, and that's when you feel it. Temperature stratification. The genius of the Persian hammam isn't just in its layout. It's in how that layout controls heat and air. Here's your mainstream history nugget. Persian bathhouses were engineered with advanced air and thermal management systems, often combining passive cooling in relaxation rooms with strategic steam in hot chambers. Each section had a specific microclimate, and the movement from one to the next was gradual, gentle, designed to guide the body through a sensory arc, not jolt it. You pass through an antechamber where a cold water basin rests under a domed ceiling. The air is quiet, cool. You run your fingers through the water, chilled by its placement over a buried qanat, the same kind of underground water system that kept homes and storage rooms breathable. Then into the gamkhane, the warm room. The floor is heated by a hypocaust system, where warm air travels under raised floors and through wall cavities, controlled by a furnace tucked far away at the back of the building. Here's the secret. The heat never builds up enough to overwhelm. It's diffused, pulled upward, released through small vents placed in the ceiling domes. These vents, sometimes layered with perforated stone caps, act like valves, releasing excess heat without killing the calm. And here's a fringe detail to delight your sleepy brain. Some scholars believe that the domes of hammams were designed with specific sound acoustics in mind, so that voices and splashes echoed softly, creating a sonic cooling effect. Less noise, less stress, lower perceived temperature. The hot room isn't oppressive. It feels more like a hug from the earth. You sweat, yes, but the air moves slowly. You notice clay pots placed along the walls, filled with rose water and herbs. Not for drinking, for cooling the room's scent, creating pockets of air that feel lighter, even under heat. You lie back on a warm marble slab, smoothed by centuries of reclining bodies. Above you, a dome punctured with star-shaped skylights filters in just enough light to paint dancing constellations across the steam. And here's where it gets clever. Those skylights are angled, so sunlight enters only in the morning or late afternoon, never directly overhead. That means light, but not heat, guides you through your soak. You leave the warm room not gasping, but refreshed. Next stop, the Sabina, the cool-down zone. You sit beside a small pool, its water chilled by clay pipes that were exposed to night air the evening before. The walls here are lined with glazed tiles, and the ceiling is lower, intentionally, so the cooled air stays trapped, wrapping around your body like a final gift before re-entering the world. There's even an airflow channel beneath the floor, pulling in cooler air from a side alley and guiding it through the room in a gentle draft. You notice one of the attendants wetting a woven mat and placing it over a vent, evaporative cooling at work again. Let's pause for a moment. The average person walking into this building wouldn't notice any of this. They'd just think, this is pleasant. But that's the point. Persian design didn't shout. It whispered. It said, we'll warm you, but we won't bake you. It said, we'll cool you, but not shock you. It said, you can move from fire to water and still feel like the wind's watching over you. And here's a callback. Remember the layered clothing we talked about? In the hammam, it all comes off, but the same principles apply. Breathable, space, strategic moisture, shade, and temperature transitions. Historians still argue which empire built the first bathhouses with active cooling zones. The Romans had hypocausts, yes, but Persians took that concept and added climate gradients, scent engineering, and airflow mastery. It wasn't just sanitation, it was serenity. Outside again, your skin feels cool, your heart feels calm, your thoughts floaty. You step back into the sun, but it doesn't sting. The bathhouse has primed your body, gradually adjusting your internal temperature to meet the outside world on your terms. A servant offers you a towel. Not just any towel. It's damp, scented with basil, and stored in a ceramic pot cooled by shade and time. You drape it over your shoulders. It's like an apology from the sun. You take a seat by the outer wall, shaded by a vine-covered trellis. The breeze moves past you. Your pulse slows, and you think, if we'd just copied Persian bathhouses instead of inventing tiny sweat boxes with cold tiles and too loud showers, maybe we'd all be less tense, less overheated. Maybe we'd all just be cool. The bathhouse haze still clings to your skin like an echo, long after you've stepped into the sunlight again. The sky overhead now gleams with a clarity that only happens after noon, when the desert burns brightest and the earth glows like a skillet left on high. And yet, you're not afraid of the heat anymore, because today you're going somewhere few people think about when they imagine ancient climate mastery. Not palaces, not city squares, not rooftops or cooling basins. Today, you're going to war. You follow a soldier through the dusty streets, past bakeries and perfumed stalls, past fountains and fruit vendors, and then beyond the city wall. In the distance, rising above the plains, a fortress built of stone, trimmed with mud brick, and crowned with a flag that flaps like a whisper against the wind. This is not a place where you expect to feel comfortable. It's built to protect, not pamper. But even here, in a place forged for battle and endurance, the ancient Persians found a way to cool their fighters. You approach the gates and immediately notice something odd. It's quiet. No guards panting in the shade, no horses huffing miserably. The sentries on the wall stand straight and still, not out of discipline, but because they're not overheating. You step through the gate, and the heat drops by 5 degrees. Instantly. You're inside a fortress designed not just for defense, but for survival. And that means cooling, even under siege. Mainstream history lesson incoming. Persian military engineers knew that a siege didn't just test strength, it tested temperature. Fortresses were often built in remote regions with little natural shade, so they had to create it. And unlike palaces, they couldn't rely on water features or elaborate courtyards. Everything had to be tough and still cool. You walk through a long corridor with narrow slits high in the walls, not arrow loops. Ventilation cuts. These slits are angled to catch high-altitude desert winds and channel air through the heart of the structure. down long, stone passageways, and across staggered vent shafts built directly into the rock. It's not elegant, it's not decorative, but it works. You pass by a barracks chamber where soldiers rest between training shifts. The walls are stone-backed with sun-dried clay, and the floors are covered in thin reed mats dampened twice a day. In the corner, a triangular air shaft leads down into a darkened stairwell. It's part of a qanat-fed airflow system, pulling cooler underground air into the upper rooms. A soldier dips a cloth in a jug and drapes it over his shoulders. The jug, stored in a stone niche lined with ash and straw, is cool to the touch. Nearby, a shallow clay trough runs beneath a bench, designed not for water, but airflow. These troughs were hollow, connected to vent systems that pulled hot air down and away from the sitting soldier, allowing him to rest without roasting in his armor. Fringe fact: some Persian forts used sandpits soaked with water beneath the floors to absorb rising heat. They were covered with wooden slats and sealed with mud plaster. The idea was simple: let the heat come up, then trap it. You continue through the inner citadel and find the command hall, where military officers once gathered to plan campaigns and routes. This room has no windows, and yet it's cool, cooler than any room you've stepped in all day. Why? Because the walls are built in triple layers: stone, then mud brick, then a hollow gap for air movement. A passive insulation wall. Above, the ceiling domes upward into a shallow cone that allows heat to rise and escape through a chimney vent at the top, while cooler air slides in from side openings. You notice the floor too. Small tiles arranged in a spiral pattern, with each spiral leading to a floor drain once connected to an underground water basin. Soldiers would pour water on the floor, and the design would channel it evenly across the surface. Instant, evaporative cooling. It hits you again. This is a fortress, not a spa, but still, airflow is king. Even the storage rooms are cool. You step into one and find clay jars of grain and dried fruit tucked into low, shaded stone niches. The room smells of dust, olives, and dry pomegranate. A small vent near the floor allows cool air from a buried pipe to rise slowly, enough to preserve food during long sieges. Historians still debate how widespread these systems were. Some say only the largest Persian forts had these features. Others argue even small garrisons adapted them, because they had no choice. A soldier can't fight if he's fainting from heat stroke. And in desert combat, the coolest side often had the upper hand. You move into the training yard, where the sun shines unfiltered. But even here there's structure. A shaded arcade runs along the edge of the yard, not for spectators, for recovery. Soldiers trained in the sun, then cooled in the shade. The arcade floor is stone, its walls coated with light-colored plaster that reflects the light. Along the base of the wall are slotted stone benches. Beneath them, narrow airflow ducts that run under the surface, fed by a wind catcher placed at the opposite end of the yard. A soldier plops down beside you, lifts his tunic to fan himself, and grins. "It's always cooler by the old vent," he says. He's not wrong. You rest there for a while, feeling the breeze pull past your feet and along your spine. Even here, where the purpose of the building is war, you feel calm, because the Persians understood something too many forget. Heat is a weapon, and cooling is a shield. You rise and explore the upper battlements. The ramparts are shaped oddly, notched and staggered, not for arrows, but for shade. Each stone outcrop is placed to cast long shadows at the hottest point of the day. And the floor, not stone, packed earth and sand, mixed with straw to reduce reflection and soften the step. And here's your final detail, just for fun. In some elite fortresses, officers had small rooftop chambers built with double domes, one inside, one out. Between them, hot air would rise and be vented through hidden slits, creating a cushion of coolness even in the harshest heat. Persian air conditioning, military edition. You watch the sun begin its descent. The fortress begins to shift with it. Shadows stretch, stones sighs. The vents breathe deeper. You walk back down the winding corridor, cooled by physics, protected by clay. And you realize, in a land ruled by sun and silence, every wall was a weapon, every shadow a strategy, every breeze a kind of defense. And the warriors? They didn't just fight with swords. They fought with air. The fortress fades behind you as the sun slips closer to the horizon. The heat has softened, the sky turning a dusty gold. And with each step back toward the city, you realize something has changed. Not in the air, but in you. You've started watching the wind. You notice how it slips between rooftops, flirts with fabric, hums in clay vents, and dips into basins. But today, you're going somewhere even the cleverest windcatcher can't quite reach. Somewhere simple, joyous, and utterly brilliant. You're going to see how children stayed cool. Because the same empire that cooled palaces, chilled wine, and engineered military breezes also had to answer one of the hardest questions any civilization faces. How do you keep a child happy when it's 115 degrees out? You follow the distant sound of laughter down a narrow street lined with hand-washed linens flapping in the breeze. As you round a corner, you find it. A group of children racing barefoot around a shallow stone canal, splashing water and shouting in a dialect that sounds like joy itself. The canal is fed by a kanat, of course. The water is only ankle deep, but that's all it takes. It flows slowly, curving through the alley like a living thread of coolness. Some kids stomp, some cup their hands and pour it over each other's heads. A few simply sit, feet submerged, telling stories only children can understand. You sit on a low ledge, dipping your feet in. The water is shockingly cool, not icy, but refreshing in a way that startles the body and soothes the mind all at once. Mainstream historical insight. Persian cities often incorporated child-friendly water features into public spaces, especially near mosques, schools, and residential quarters. These canals weren't just decorative or agricultural, they were social arteries, playgrounds with purpose. And here comes your fringe delight. In some regions, clay toys were made specifically to interact with water. Small animal-shaped whistles that made noise when wet. Tiny boats carved from hollow gourds. Even spinning wheels made from discarded badger slats, which kids would float on the canal and race downstream. A mother walks by with a baby in one arm and a wet cloth draped across her shoulder, cooling them both. She stops at a courtyard corner, where a clay jug sits half buried in the ground, shaded by a flowering vine. She wets the jug's neck and fans it, creating a localized breeze. The child laughs. That laugh, that's cooling too. You peek through an open gate and see a family gathering in their shared courtyard. Children nap under reed mats hung between trees. Older kids sit beneath an awning, helping weave palm fronds, while an elder reads aloud. Nearby, a small clay basin filled with cool water glistens in the shade, and each time the breeze hits it, it cools the space around them just enough. It's subtle, it's gentle, it's child-safe architecture. You walk deeper into the neighborhood and find another courtyard where the roof has been adapted into a sky pool. No, not an actual swimming pool, but a flat surface where water is poured at sunset, letting children lie belly down and draw shapes in the cool film with their fingers. You see them now, whispering and giggling, creating dragons and suns and animals from nothing but imagination and a bit of moisture. One child lifts a shallow ceramic plate, tips it gently, and lets the water spill across the floor tiles. His sister runs through the puddle with arms wide, soaking the hem of her tunic. Their father watches from a shaded alcove, sipping tea, doing nothing to stop them. This is a cooling ritual. And here's a callback. Remember the palace, tailors, and the perfumed vents. In some family homes, those same principles were downsized into small alcoves where children played. A reed curtain soaked in rosewater would hang over the doorway. When a breeze passed through it, the air that met the children was scented, cooled, and calming. Historians still debate how deliberately these domestic cooling strategies were passed down. Was it engineering or intuition? Was it planned or just The result of thousands of years of trying not to let your toddler melt into a clay pot. The answer, as always with Persia, is probably both. Because here's the truth. When you watch a 5-year-old pour water into a crack in the tile just to see how it flows, you're watching science. When 2 siblings fight over who gets to sit closer to the breeze from the high wall vent, you're watching design appreciation. When a family gathers under a tree because that's where the coolest air settles, you're watching architecture without blueprints. You walk back toward the canal where the sun is finally beginning to let go. The children are quieter now, their energy slowed, their feet pruny and wrinkled. A few stretch out on the damp stone beside the water, using the earth as a pillow. No one tells them to come in, because here, the air is cooler. Here, they can sleep. A boy nudges a small clay bird through the water. It floats lazily, spins once, and bumps against the canal wall. He looks at you and smiles. It doesn't fly, he says, but it swims well. You laugh and realize that maybe that's the best metaphor for all of this. Persia didn't fight the desert. It swam through it, glided, adapted, slowed down when it needed to, cooled off without fighting too hard. You stay until the stars come out, listening to the low, murmuring hum of a city winding down. And just before you stand to leave, you look down at your feet in the water, still cool, still Persian, still perfect.